Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into episode 3 of In the Clutch Season 3. I'm Teddy Ball alongside Jonathan Michael, and on today's episode, Gavin Russell is making his Season 3 debut of In the Clutch, not his, first debut. You've been on the previous season.
I have.
The Russ bus is back in the station, baby. Ding, ding.
I have. I think I was part of the original episode of In the Clutch. I mean, I was part of most of the first 2 seasons, so been on a little hiatus, but I'm very happy to be here, folks.
Happy to have you, and also happy to talk about some Week 3 and Week 4 football for you guys. I'm excited. We're really in the thick of it now at this point in the season. We talked about the last couple episodes, just the beginning of the season, the feeling out process. But at this point, teams know their identity. They know, their game plan each and every week. Things can change, obviously. Players can come back. Players can go out. But for the most part, we're pretty much in the season now.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed kind of following a little more from afar. Obviously, you guys have been out on Friday nights up to this point, but getting to kind of see a wider range of games, following along with what you guys are doing, just seeing other scores come in. Teams got to knock the rust off a little bit, especially as you play non-conference opponents. It's a little bit harder to know what you're expecting, when you play a team from 2 hours, 3 hours away. So that's when teams knock the rust off. And you mentioned figuring themselves out, what's going to work, what's not going to work. That's when sometimes starters are bumped by a guy that's, working really hard in practice. So I think now we'll start to see a little more regularity and consistency. And we've seen some big performances early on in the season.
Yeah, certainly. I think, the third week, the second week is important, because you can kind of see, okay, are these teams, for real? What's been a commonality? What's been a difference between those 2 games? Maybe the first game was a fluke. Second game, they get back on it. Now after 3 games, I think we kind of know a little bit more about each team. I think, most teams by now have usually played a pretty good team, at least one of them. There's just some teams out there that still have their biggest test coming, but, most teams by now have, faced a good test. We've seen how they've been able to respond to it and everything. So, really the biggest thing is, it takes a couple weeks to kind of, get that feeling, that idea kind of under you. I mean, especially you look at last week was the first AP poll of the season, and there were, and nothing against, the other voters on that poll, but there were some teams in there who, I was a little unsure of why they were in there, because they were 0-2. They were maybe really good last year, a couple years before, but I'm like, they haven't really proved much, this year or whatever. So I think that, it shows that, even people that, cover these teams like we do are still trying to figure these teams out a little bit and everything like that. But I think, especially after week 3 and this coming week, after this week, we're going to be almost halfway through the regular season. So it's crazy to believe. But, I think we are kind of starting to figure a few more things out.
Definitely. And once you get that conference feel under your belt as well, it really is, it's a different, not start of the season, but really kind of is, because especially the first 2 games, like you said, you could play tough teams and good competition, but once you start to play the teams where it really matters, like for example, you got the Washington and the Mortons that go 0-2 the first 2 weeks, play really good teams, just different ideologies, play really hard teams, try to test yourself early, and then you go into conference play, and that's where you can really start to apply things that you're working on in practice and things that you try to do against these really good teams in the early weeks.
Well, and one of the things with conference play, which obviously Big 12 does a little bit differently, every conference has their own kind of format with their conference schedule, but I think it's a little more personal. Like I was saying, you play a team from 2 or 3 hours away, you just kind of go in and you're playing a football game, right? Now, when you're playing a conference team, even if it's a subpar conference team, there's something about it, right? You see the social media, people are texting, people are talking trash, right? It's kind of that build-up all week. It's that rivalry mentality, and we've got great conferences around here that, really like to go toe-to-toe. Healthy competition, very competitive, though. So it certainly adds an extra layer where you don't want to see any one of those conference teams on any given Friday night, right? Like any conference team feasibly could beat you on any given Friday if you let them. So it's one of those things that you really got to take it seriously, and this is when you got to start playing your best football.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, I know we talked before this episode, we want to talk a lot about the Mid-Illini. It was an interesting, big week in that conference. And, I think, there were definitely some interesting results. Obviously, number one, peaking over Dunlap, whatever, I'm sure we'll touch on more on that game in a second, but, Washington, played Metamora close for about 2.5 quarters and then ran away with 27 straight points and ended up blowing them out 37-7. Their 4th straight win in that rivalry. So, that's a big step back for Washington. Metamora back to the drawing board, but another good chance to get back at it against Morton. East Peoria, 47-28 over Limestone. So Raiders, if you hadn't believed them for sure, they are for real. Obviously, I think still a gap between them and the Dunlaps, the Washingtons, the Metamoras of the world. But they can definitely win some football games. Obviously Morton, big win over Canton, so most people expected that. So, it's not like Morton, just barely beat Canton by 2 or 3 scores. They made a big statement win, put up 53 points or whatever. So, and also just want to touch briefly on it. We'll talk about it later. But, Peoria High making a big statement as well, 58-52 over state-ranked Morris. So that was a huge win as well.
It really is like, like you said, for just the early part of the season, as much as it is, just getting used to getting your feet under you and, getting started on the season, just being able to have that extra motivation of like you said, the conference rivals, and just having that kind of that energy that brings with it, whether it's the fan bases, the social media presence that you see about things. It's just like, it really is another kick for these teams, especially the ones that want to make a statement. They're able to use that to fuel, and it kind of makes the better teams better, and the teams that maybe, not the bad teams worse, but it just makes the teams that really want it more. It just gives them a little bit more motivation. And like you talked about as well, it gives those players that, to start the season, they might not be as emphasized, maybe not in the previews like we've talked about the last couple of weeks, players making names for themselves that weren't in the previews that we wrote, that did really start to get that momentum going, and that's really what makes a team throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, it really does. And I think, like John said, we'll touch on it, but there's a lot of big games heading into this week, and they knew it, right? And everybody's talking, the communities are buzzing, hey, Dunlap's thinking, hey, Pekin's coming to town, and Pekin's thinking, we're going to Dunlap. It's just that mentality from when the week 1 games, or rather week 2 games in, heading into week 3. That's all everybody's thinking about for the next 6 or 7 days, right? Like next Friday, got it circled on the calendar. So every week from here on out is going to be circled on the calendar for these teams, especially the ones vying for playoff spots, because every game is so critical.
It truly is like that history that goes with it. One of the things I want to talk about, just like that the game we broadcasted, Washington Metamora, one of the most historic rivalries, in the state of Illinois, especially here in Central Illinois. I think their 66th matchup of their entire history was last Friday. Washington came out on top on that one, 37-7. It was a bit of a runaway game for Washington, especially there in the second half. But you could still feel the energy, like especially from both sides. You could see Washington. They might have been upset from the people kind of, not us writing us off. I know we don't write them off because we think Washington's a really good team, but some people have said that, especially the 0-2 start. But like they were a little bit mad about that. But also you can just see the rivalry matchup of Metamora and like NBC Sports Chicago. I said this on the broadcast last week. They had them as the 5th ranked rivalry in the state of Illinois going into this year. So it really just like that extra footing is what was great.
Quick question: I want to know what the top 4 are. I need to look at that. Excuse me, I need to look at that article. See you got like 4 rivalries that are better than Metamora and Washington. I
They're
don't
all
know.
probably
I
going to be
think,
Chicago-based, I guarantee.
I'm sure. There's probably a Chicago bias, as usual.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I would invite whoever wrote that article, come down to a Metamora, Washington.
Yeah, right.
See what that's like. You might be put at number 1.
At least they made the list. We'll give it that.
Yeah.
Let's be glad they made the list.
A top 5 is still pretty high. Like, yes, it could always be higher. I would be curious to see what the Central Illinois top rankings are. Maybe we should talk about that
That's a good one.
on one another episode.
Ooh,
but
I like that. I like
Metamora
that idea.
Washington is definitely up there. Speaking of that Metamora Washington game, there were some good players in that one. I had a couple things written down for that. I know we had the player of the game that we talked about afterwards was Hunter Reed. Hunter Reed had 4 touchdowns on the day. Overall, just a great game. But one that I was kind of talking to you about when we were deciding was Carter Prina. He really just took that game over on the edge for Washington, and just that was Washington's whole bread and butter on defense, was just able to get pressure on the quarterback, and it helped them all throughout, just making Metamora not able to really get offense started the entire game. They had 1 touchdown, but other than that, it was pretty silent for them.
Yeah, and and before I say anything, I want to clarify some things on the broadcast on Friday night. I said Hunter Reed had 4 touchdowns. I found out later, shortly after the game, that 2 of those touchdowns were actually scored by Carter Quinn, who's number 26. And the reason I said Hunter Reed is because the font of Washington's jerseys and the way that some of the jerseys were rolled up, the 6 on Carter Quinn's jersey looked like a 0, and number 20 is Hunter Reed. So I erroneously credited Reed with 4 touchdowns. He had 2. Still a great game, over 100 yards. I think he ran for about $140. So a great game for him, and also a good game too for Quinn. He was efficient in mostly the second half. Had 2 of those touchdowns. So, really big credit to both those guys. That really carried the load for Washington on the ground. But and then back to the other Carter Prina, as you said. He led a great performance from the D line. Obviously him and Noah Bell. Multi-year all-conference selections right there. So those 2 guys alone give Washington one of the best D lines in the conference. Metamora's offensive line, I think they struggled a little bit. They broke out one big play, that 77-yard touchdown run by Evan Kyle in the third quarter. Other than that, though, not a ton of big plays, and it's just overall this is a line that's just a little bit younger. They've shown some promise in the early games, but you go from again, nothing against Sterling or LaSalle Peru, but you go against those lines, and then you go to Washington's line. That's a whole different ball game. And I think we saw that some growing pains. Metamora will be better for it, but I think experience in the trenches was a big factor in that game.
Well, it definitely. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say. I mean, if you watch the Chicago Bears. You got to realize how big of a deal the offensive line is. That makes or breaks your offense.
Metamora's offensive line solo was far and beyond better than Chicago's offensive line. The Bears' offensive line on Sunday night was single-handedly the worst offensive line performance I have ever seen in any level of football.
It was bad.
Horrendous. All 31, 30 whatever teams in our coverage area, I'm sure, have better starting offensive lines than the Bears.
I feel like if you put some shoulder pads on me and Joey Wright, we could have gone and knocked some bodies around better in Houston than the Bears offensive line did. We're not going to talk about – I'm just going to get mad if I talk about that.
We got to stop this train on the tracks before it derails.
Yeah, that does emphasize the point, though, of how big the line play is. And I've always been a big proponent of it all starts right there. The games can be won and lost in the trenches. Now, you have to have your playmakers, right? Everybody's going to give the due attention to a quarterback, to a receiver, to a running back. But those offensive and defensive linemen are taken for granted way too often because, like we saw in this game, Metamora wasn't able to really get those effective holes opened up. They weren't able to make that extra block. And Washington, with a lot of really good pass rushers, did take advantage of that. So back to the drawing board a little bit. Metamora is a better team on the line than that. We saw them in the playoffs last year, allowed them to run the ball really well with some great line play. But that's what these early season games are for. I think that the final score is a bit of a runaway, but in defense to Metamora, I think if you play this game again this coming week, it could be a whole different story. I think sometimes when you let it just slip away, it can kind of start unraveling. You lose your confidence. I have no question in my mind that they're pretty similarly based teams. Washington just kind of got the better of this one and fed off the home crowd.
Yeah, that's kind of what I talked about towards the end of that game, too. I mentioned how, in the land of MMA, styles make fights, and it seemed like that game for Metamora was just it was an uncomfortable matchup for them. It was like, the age of Metamora's offensive line, there's still a lot of younger guys. They do have some leadership there, obviously some seniors on that O-line, but just the Washington was just on both sides, offensive and defensive line were just so dominant, and it just shows from offensively just how big their O-linemen were. I think you said the average size of their O-linemen were about 6'2", 240.
6'3", 240. Yeah.
That's insane.
That's some big guys, man.
That's
just
the average size again. I mean, that's not. They have guys that are much bigger than that, and the size of Washington's offensive line is second to none. And real quick again, not to change gears too much, but another team that has a good offensive line that came up big on Friday night. Pekin, they return one of the most experienced lines in the conference. They have 3 starters back. One of them, Hunter Lamerson, all-conference guy. That's more than just about most of their conference opponents. And, Dunlap maybe a little bit younger on the lines. And obviously there was the game came down to that ultimately that broken up 2-point or that intercepted 2-point conversion by Dylan Anderson, who just had a phenomenal game, 3 touchdowns on the offensive end, including the go-ahead one in the fourth quarter. So obviously, Anderson's plays were, probably the biggest factor in that game. And again, I wasn't at that game. I didn't watch the entire every single play. But, you look at that game, and I'm sure that Pekin's offensive line played a pretty good factor in the game in both, running the ball and also giving their quarterback Brogan Benassi some time to throw and, find, those those big completions to Anderson, and Benassi has looked pretty solid. I think Pekin's had a pretty solid offensive attack. You got Ty Jackson coming up at running back, who's becoming one of the better backs in the conference. So I think again, just obviously beating Dunlap is huge. Whatever, they made a statement. I really do think that Pekin could be a contender this season. Mid-Illini is wide open right now.
Yeah, they've surprised me a little bit for sure. And I think on that Dunlap front, they are very talented, and they've got a lot of really good players. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. If you know them by any measure, you're going to know Bargan, you're going to know Sutter, you're going to know those guys. But I think going into the season, one of the things that, my biggest question mark for them was they're not super deep all over, especially with the line and stuff. They're a little bit younger. When you start having to elevate those guys that maybe don't have much, if any, varsity experience, you're elevating some guys from JV level to come be your backups, and you just don't have that same depth. That can beat you sometimes, and I think that's where Pekin has a difference at. Pekin is obviously the biggest school, one of the biggest schools in the area up there with Community being in 7A. They just have a little more depth. They have a little more experience, and I think early in the season especially, that will win you some games. Pekin played really well. They did a lot of things good, but I think just having that extra element of a little bit more depth and a little more experience just took them over the hump, which definitely should scare other Mid-Illini teams that Pekin has that element, and Pekin really could win on any given Friday now.
Yeah, I truly agree with you, and I think last season for Pekin, a lot of people kind of wrote them off, especially the year before that, 11-1, right? Obviously, school history that year, great watching them. But then the next year, 4-5, a lot different. And I think a lot of people going into this year didn't think of Pekin, to be obviously nowhere close to where they were 2 years ago, but just maybe around the same of what they were. And obviously, we still have some time to go left in the season. But overall, what you can take away from it is that the people that played last year, there's a lot of starters in that 2022 season that were gone going into last year. There's a lot of those guys got first time playing on the varsity level, and so now you go into their senior year. Brogan Benassi is a junior, so he's going to have a whole nother year next year, and it's just kind of clicking things together. And it's a Pekin team that a lot of people might not expected to be that good last year, just because they didn't have the experience that they have now.
Yeah, no, and there's some great players on Pekin too, like a wide receiver Peyton Hess. I saw him early on the season at 7-on-7. He's a tall, athletic guy. I mean, great guy to have at wide receiver. So Benassi and him have been obviously getting along pretty well in the past game. You got Landon Erksleben, 3-year starter on the D line or whatever. So, and he's also, I think, got some rushing touchdowns this season as well. So he's kind of been, I haven't seen it, what exactly it is, but kind of that fullback, that bully ball running back, goal line back for Pekin. So he's making it happen on both sides of the ball as well. So again, you got that. You have the the line. You got Hudson Nutter, Doug Nutter's son. Multi-year starter back at linebacker too. So I mean, yeah, I think some people were kind of underrating Pekin, and and Pekin knew that. And I talked with some of them before the season, and they were kind of the general vibe was hey, trust us, we're gonna we're gonna be a good team this year, and and I think we have good reason to kind of trust what they said now. So and some people were saying, hey, that game against Dunlap was an upset. I think Dunlap, most people expected them to win that game, but I wouldn't call it an upset. It's too early to call that. Dunlap obviously has talent, but I think many people were too early to crown them. They have great talent. Don't get me wrong. They can win the Mid-Illini Conference. Dunlap is a very good football team, but they were too early to be crowned. It's after 2 weeks, and they played Galesburg and Rock Island, who, let's be honest, are not world beaters. Those are two teams that are near the bottom of the Western Big Six. So I know Dunlap still has, a great team. I think they'll probably win big most of these next couple weeks. Got Limestone, East Peoria, Canton, or whatever. But, I think they still got, some things to prove if they want to contend for a Mid-Illini Conference title. So
I would agree. And, not that I've been alive all that long compared to maybe, some people that follow football around here, but being a Peoria native, all the years that I've watched football around here, Mid-Illini, Big 12, this is one of the most wide open Mid-Illini fields I've seen in a very, very long time. I mean, I can't remember another year where you have this many teams kind of vying for that crown. It seems like every year there's always maybe one or two that we expect to kind of pull away from the rest, and they're the teams that are going, 7-0 in the conference, maybe 6-1, something like that. This year, I feel like there's 4 or 5 teams that are right in the mix of it. I mean, certainly it's still early and we've got a lot left to play, but and we'll get a feel for it over the next couple of weeks, but I feel like there's a lot of different stuff that could happen. If Metamora won the conference somehow, I wouldn't be overly surprised. If Dunlap still end up winning the conference, I wouldn't be overly surprised.
No,
I mean, like I said, there's 4 or 5 teams that could be right in the middle of this, and it's kind of exciting to watch. I think it's making for one of the more entertaining years in the Mid-Atlantic we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, we have a great week coming up ahead because Washington heads to Pekin. That'll be a great game. That'll be a great measuring stick to see, okay, we know that Pekin can beat Dunlap, but, can they beat Washington? If Pekin can beat Washington, there's a chance that maybe you look at Pekin as the Mid-Atlantic favorite, at least temporarily. And we haven't even brought up Morton yet as well. I mean, obviously, a 53-7 win over Canton is what most people probably expected. But, big opportunity for them at Metamora. That'll be our WMBD game of the week, by the way. You can watch that live and for free on ciproud.com. But, Morton, all of a sudden, they beat, Canton by 46. They go out and beat Metamora potentially. They're right there in the mix as well. So you can't forget about the Potters either. So
no, and I think you say a measuring stick, and it certainly is, seeing how they stack up against some of these teams. But I feel like just having the contrasting styles of play in the Mid-Atlantic, you can't necessarily say, well, they beat so-and-so, so I expect them to come out and do the same against this team. I feel like each week is so individual, and you can only really go based off, how they played individually head-to-head with that one team. So it's really hard to say what, say, Washington and Pekin is going to look like, or some of these other games. But I do think we know that they are going to be competitive because of what we have seen over these last couple weeks. Definitely expect a lot of competitiveness.
I definitely agree with both of you guys. And actually, before this, I kind of I listed off the standings for the Mid-Atlantic so far, and then I could put a little thing next to them to see the teams that are in the running for the playoffs. Obviously, it's only 3 weeks in right now, but you have Morton. They are 1-2, but Morton is a really good team. They played 2 good teams to start the year. Washington, same situation, 1-2. They beat Metamora last week. East Peoria, the only undefeated team in the conference yet, at 3-0. Pekin 2-1, obviously with the big win against Dunlap. Dunlap 2-1 as well, but they were just right there neck and neck with Pekin. I could have went either way. And then Metamora as well with 2-1, and then they lost to Washington. But those are 6 teams right there that are just in the running for not only the conference championship, but just making the playoffs. We could last season we saw the Big 12 had 7 playoff teams. Okay, we could have a season with Mid-Atlantic where that many teams are making it.
Well, that would be really scary, too, especially if some of these teams that are maybe a little better than what their final record will suggest, if they get in at 5-4 or 6-3, you're talking about some upset time. They'll go play somebody from Chicago, and they'll be like, this little podunk, Peoria team, 5-4, blah, blah, blah. Here come the Morton Potters, and kind of flip the script on what happened to them last year. Or, Metamora or something like that. They're going to come out and they're going to play hard, and even if they are 6-3, 7-2, kind of right, and they're in the middle, they're probably a little bit better than that just because they lost a couple early games. You obviously can't get those back. But, yeah, I expect a lot of teams to be in the mix, and we could have one of the best overall Mid-Atlantic years in a very, very long time.
Yep, certainly. And another note, again, obviously, we know this is going to be – we're going to talk a lot about Mid-Atlantic as well. I do want to, touch on some of the other schools, too, as well. I talk about, 3-0 teams, East Peoria, Normal Community. Obviously, they're 3-0, big win over Urbana, big surprise there. And then Bloomington. How about Bloomington? They're also 3-0 as well. And get this. Purple Raiders have scored exactly 41 points in all 3 of their games so far. So remarkable consistency from Niall Mulcahy's group. They had a really big game against Normal West on Friday. That'll be really big, I think, because I think the way it looks right now, this is just my personal take. I think Normal Community and Peoria High, definitely the 2 front runners right now. Obviously, Lions, that big win over Morris that we still need to talk about. And, other than, but after those guys, maybe you're adding a third, primary contender. I think it's either Bloomington or Normal West. So I think that game will be really big. West maybe needs that win a little bit more. They got 1 loss in their schedule to Normal Community. But that should be a really good game, I think, down in the Twin Cities as well. So, and, P&D won their first game, so they were about due for a big win. They got one over Champaign Central, 54-15. Richwoods Emmanuel, though, were unfortunately not as lucky and dropped to 1-2 and 0-3 respectively. But
yeah, I really do. I think when you look at the Big 12, you might see it is a little bit top-heavy, especially with Normal Community, one of the better teams in the state. But really, like you said, if you really look through it, you got so many teams in there that could truly make a run. Bloomington has played great so far this season, especially when we saw them.
Yeah.
Peoria High is always, one of the best offensive teams and defensive as well, just in the area. I do feel kind of bad for Peoria and Notre Dame because they are a truly really good team, and they're good at what they try to do, which is run the ball. But they've just had to play a pretty rough side of their schedule so far early on as they're 1-2. But Peoria and Notre Dame is also a team where they could on any given night beat a conference team, even other teams like that.
For them, it's just get to 5 wins. As long as they can make the playoffs, it doesn't really matter who they're playing. They've not many. I shouldn't say no, but not many of these 4A schools, except maybe, for example, a team like Rochester or maybe IC Catholic up in Elmhurst has played teams of P&E's caliber, or whatever, or teams of the caliber that P&E plays, if that makes sense. Probably did. I mess up the delivery there, but so just as long as they can get to 5 wins, I think they're probably good. There's not a lot of easy wins left on their schedule, but definitely some winnable games. They're going to have to beat, some good teams out there. They might have to beat a team. They might have to beat Centennial. They may have to beat Bloomington. They may have to beat Danville. Their non-conference game is against Christian Brothers from Missouri, and that is an absolutely stacked team right there. So, again, definitely not a guarantee by any means. If they can win it, all the more power to them. But, obviously, just want to get to 5 wins if you're the Irish, I think. And, Peoria High, again, they're, I think they should have a major jump in the AP poll. They were receiving votes last week. Beat Morris. They were ranked. I think Peoria High should be a top 5 team this week. At least I would hope.
I would
because they deserve it.
I would agree, especially you go on the road and win that game, and they really haven't skipped a beat. Losing Tim Thornton, and obviously he created just a great program here, and it's being carried on really, really well. So more power to Peoria High, and they were down in that game. That was a game that they were not up in, and they showed a lot of resiliency. So I wouldn't want to play the Lions right now. They're playing Manual this week. I would expect a win there. So they by the halfway point, roughly more or less, they should be looking perfect, and the Lions are going to be looking scarier than ever.
The Peoria High is always just a team that, even when they have had their struggles, not necessarily struggles, but when you see games where they're a little bit closer than you might think, they always find a way to pull it out. It's just like the consistency of Peoria High, and they're just so high octane. That's what I've said every single time I talk about Peoria High is just high octane, because when you see a Peoria High game, you're in for a treat. We've talked about it every single week now, especially last season and the year before with Malachi Washington. It's just they have so many playmakers in Peoria, and it's just it truly is one of the better football teams in the area to watch. But one thing I want to talk about too, Normal Community this week, they are 3-0, but they do play Kankakee in week 4, and this should be a game. I talked about it last week that I was excited for, but this should be a game that everyone has circled on their calendar, because it is going to be one of the better games in the state of Illinois.
Oh, definitely, and we're so glad that we have a Clutch Sports Media member, Michael Savoy, that lives around the area. So Michael will be at that game. He'll have the story on CSM Overtime afterwards. So that's going to be just a phenomenal game. And boy, if Community wins that game, that Kankakee team is really good. Their only loss came to Nazareth Academy. He was number 1 in 5A, one state last year. So, you saw what Kankakee did to Washington. So that is a very strong team, and that is going to be just a phenomenal game. Definitely Normal Community's biggest test until a Week 9 game against Peoria High. So I know that's still over a month away, but definitely a game that to keep an eye on in a big Week 9 slate.
Yeah, they got a lot of really good players, and Beatty, Marquand Gary. There's so much there to like, for the Ironmen, and people thought, hey, they graduated a lot of players from last year. Might take a little regression, take a little building back up, but they have not skipped a beat whatsoever. And man, if we get down to a Week 9 game, Peoria High, Normal Community, if they're both undefeated, if they're both playing for a conference title, how huge would that be? That'd be primetime football right there, and you can't ask for much more. But a long way to go. Both teams are just looking to pick up as many quality wins as they possibly can along the way here, and again, just put some respect on their name, and they certainly have done so here in the early going.
Definitely, and again, just kind of keeping the train moving. Want to make sure we kind of talk about all the other schools here. I know again we talked a lot about Mid-Illini, whatever and stuff like that. But I know we even before the podcast we talked about some small school teams that caught our eye, like Eureka and Princeville. two teams that really made a statement this week, as well as Tri-Valley on the winning end. You talk about a team on the losing end. Fortunately, Bloomington Central Catholic, number 2 ranked team, and they lost in overtime to Paxton Buckley Loda. So, and how about Elmwood Brimfield? They put up 71 points while throwing the ball one time. They ran for over 500 yards, so that was something that stuck out to me as well.
Windish, baby.
Hey,
Bo
and
Windish.
Matthew Glenn, our reigning CSM athlete of the week
Yeah.
for the boys' side. Matthew Glenn as well. So, but how about that Week 5 game against Farmington? That is going to be an absolute dandy right there. Farmington's also 3-0 too, so I think those teams probably on a collision course.
I wonder where the small school throwdown will be that week.
I got to think long and hard about that one. I don't know. Not quite sure.
I wonder will Cody Roskins be making an appearance for the Farmers?
Oh, boy. He might have to. There's Cody loves his Farmington Farmers. And, hey, I mean, there's never a time you really can't be high on Farmington. The Farmers are playing good ball right now, too. But definitely some statements, though, in the small school games this past week.
Yeah, I really agree, especially with Princeville there. I was very optimistic about them coming into the season. They're one of those communities that when the stars align for Princeville, we've seen them be very good, over the last couple decades. They are a football community. Every year they expect to go in and win, and it hasn't always been that way, but, they absolutely have had some promise over the last few years. They've had some really good athletes come through, and talk about Jake Williams, in the game he had. We might get into some top performers later, but 5 touchdowns, and you're playing Knoxville. Knoxville was a team that a lot of people expected to be pretty competitive this season, and to win 48-19, I mean, that is an absolute statement win. Scores a lot of points, and they threw the ball, kind of unlike Elmwood Brimfield.
Yeah.
They did throw the ball. Williams passed 21 times, 16-21 on the day, and threw for just shy of 250 yards. So that's a pretty solid passing day, especially for a small school that isn't known for passing the ball that much. Princeville's added another layer to their team now I'd watch out for.
Yeah, definitely. We kind of saw, Princeville, at least last year, again, when we were able to kind of follow them, at least myself, was able to kind of follow them a bit more, see what they were kind of doing week in and week out, whatever. Logan Carruthers was a great quarterback for them last year. And then obviously Williams had kind of stepped in sometimes when Carruthers was hurt, played well. And he was the guy I had my eye on this year. But, Jake Williams may be the best quarterback you've never heard of in the Peoria area. And I'm not kidding you when I say that. I mean, ridiculously efficient. He was 16 for 21. Doesn't make a ton of mistakes. He can get it done with his legs too as well. And he's got talented receivers like Hunter Johnson, who had, I think, 7 catches for $111 or so, something of that nature, and a touchdown or 2. So, he's got some other playmakers, that can get the job done. And, really about something interesting about Princeville. I noticed this. I went out to cover one of their basketball games back in, I think, February or late January. And, obviously, it's kind of off the beaten path, for most people that live in, Peoria a little bit. I wasn't quite sure what to expect. They were very good at the time, something like 20-3, something of that tune. And I get to the game. They're playing a good team from Anawan. And immediately, the first quarter, Princeville just starts wiping the floor with them. I mean, just running up and down the court. I mean, Anawan cannot keep up. Princeville's banging threes. I mean, that game was over by halftime pretty much. I'm like, holy cow, this Princeville team is, like you said, pure high octane. And it really translates to the football side of things as well. They have some fast, athletic, fun guys at Princeville. It's not your typical Class 1A school. And, again, they had a big game this week against Rova Williamsfield. But, again, very encouraging signs from the Princes. I'm looking forward big time. They're a Week 7 game against Stark County, their rival who's also undefeated too right now.
That's a big game. Stark County is always one of those that they have circled. It's kind of like the Washington Metamora. Everybody looks at it. You may not even realize it, but to those communities, it's the world. They're already looking at that one. It doesn't matter if they're winless coming into that game. It's just that game and what those communities, how tough they play against each other. So, yeah, some big stuff coming out of the small school, kind of the oxymoron there. But, a lot of great things happening. And keep an eye on Princeville. They could be making a run at something this year.
I think that's why a lot of people are so thankful for what we do, with the small town throwdown games. We haven't gotten too lucky so far this season with the games themselves being super close, but overall you get to see kind of like a culture with certain communities that you don't get to see normally. We cover a lot of Mid-Illini, a lot of Big 12, and like the big name games around the area, but you get to see another level of things. Like those 1A schools, like you said, they really get into it, especially the whole community. And kind of going what you said as well with how good they were at basketball. A lot of those smaller schools, like those guys are they don't have a ton of people to have a whole football team without basketball players. Those guys kind of play both ways and play multiple sports, and so you can kind of tell, not 100% of the time, but like when a team's really good at football, really good at basketball, they have those athletes. Most of the time, it kind of correlates.
Well, and I look at, say, like the Illinois Fighting Illini, right, in the football side. You look at a lot of the guys that they're recruiting, and bringing in. Obviously, Brett Bielema wants to get guys from in-state, but they're not necessarily getting guys from Washington and Metamora that you're here going to them. You've got guys from Maroa Forsyth and
Gibson City,
Gibson,
Memphis,
I was gonna say Gibson City.
GCMS.
There's a player from Princeville. Heck,
Kellen Francis.
know,
Or Caden Fagan, Arthur Lovington, Atwood Hammond.
I mean, like they're pulling from the small schools because those guys are just overall athletes, and that's what they're looking for is guys with that athletic potential. And you don't have to look at the big schools always to just find them. You can look in these small schools too, and that's why it ends up being really fun. I think it's one thing, the old school kind of ground and pound, especially when you get a team like Princeville that's branching out and now willing to pass the ball and stuff. 1A and 2A could get really fun if a lot of teams start passing the ball because they're going to fly up and down the field so fast. It's going to be awesome.
Hey, also, quick shout out to Declan Dooley, El Paso Gridley punter, also with the Illini. I was at the game. I think I was at the game also this past Saturday. But I saw a tailgate truck, whatever. It had kind of like a little trailer, and it had like a little custom wrap on it. Had Declan Dooley on there. I don't know if it was his family or not. If it was just happened to be the guy on there. But I was walking around. I'm like, Declan Dooley, EPG, baby.
Yeah, they represent. Yeah.
It's just not stuff you see. Like you see it, like culture is in every place we go to. That's why the Metamora game was so important because it's just like it runs deep with that. But just we don't like I said earlier, we don't get to see all the time these smaller schools, and so it is kind of cool to have kind of put that up on a pedestal, what it deserves, because like those small schools, those small communities, when you put them together, especially rivalry games, they can be rowdy. And talking as well, another CSM game that we covered last week, Mackinac versus Eureka. We haven't really touched on that too much so far. We talked about the Metamora Washington game and then kind of went over that, but Eureka did win that one pretty dominantly, 47-0, and what we thought was going to be a really good one. I think we keep jinxing it, John. We gotta kind of just say,
so whatever this week's small town throwdown is, we may have announced it by the time this releases. Whatever it is going to be a bad game.
It's going to be horrible.
It's going to be terrible. It's going to be terrible. Don't listen to it. Don't listen to it. No. Yeah, we're just
reverse psychology.
Reverse psychology.
We're hoping. We've gotten unlucky with that, and so we're hoping that can finally see it, because once you get those, like I said, like those small town schools, and they're really going against each other, like they're really battling. You can really put on both sides of display both sides of.
But I think that should tell you though, how good Eureka is, and obviously they've been a very storied program and very a lot of respect for them, and DMAC is a good team. They are well coached. They play very very tough. They're a team full of football kids. That's what they do. And They have big kids on their team, but Eureka just kind of has that extra gear, and it's one of those things. I've seen that matchup for probably the last couple of years entering this one. I believe we've covered them. This is like the second or third straight year. Mm-hmm. It always seems like, it's kind of close early on, and then just a couple things bounce Eureka's way, and they run away with it. So they're really good at kind of piling on, getting on you early, and I think that's what it takes sometimes is not letting it fester, but really just getting down to business. You're coming out of the gate, and you want to smack somebody in the face, and you're not going to let them get up off the mat. So Eureka does that really well. They're coached very well, and I expect them, like many other teams, to just be able to go on a big run this year.
Yeah, definitely. And just kind of a big factor in that game was time of possession. Again, wasn't at that game, but based off of what I heard from multiple people who were at that game, Hornets just had the ball for so often in that game. They forced a bunch of turnovers. I mean, DMAC, a lot of 3-and-outs for them. So again, time of possession wins football games. So and so that from Eureka, who again, that was a big statement win. You look at their slate. They beat a solid Peru St. Bede team by 16. They beat Canton, who obviously Canton's 0-3 right now, but that's a team that is a school that is almost maybe not quite twice the size as Eureka, but definitely bigger. They play different competition than Eureka does, so good win nonetheless. And they got some big games coming against El Paso Gridley this week. And then how about one of the new HOCI newbies, Clinton, along with Eureka, the only undefeated team right now. So anytime the Clinton comes around and HOCI team's watching, you got to watch out. That's going to be a good game. So Hornets traveled to Clinton in week 5. And also, again, one of the other new guys, Shelbyville. I know they got bounced big by Tri-Valley, but still a good team this year. So it is going to be really, really tough for any of these teams to make the playoffs. We know that we're going to get a couple, at least, from that conference. And they're going to talk about teams that are going to be battle-tested. I mean, there are no easy wins in that conference at all, especially with the fact that Tremont has gotten a little bit better, too. I think that adds definitely kind of a new wrench into things. So, I mean, boy, oh boy. I mean, the Heart of Illinois games every week, I think, just flip a coin. I really don't know what to say. There's some really good teams in there, and anyone could win on any given week.
No doubt about it.
So credit to Eureka and their strong start. But one thing I want to ask you guys as well, kind of the last thing we want to touch up on here today, just individual performers from week 3 that stood out to you guys.
Yeah, I talked about Jake Williams. He was definitely up there on that list. And just to reiterate, 16 of 21, 249 yards, 5 touchdowns, and a big win there for Williams. So big shout out to that. Princeville looking good there. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about R.J. Jackson and Dalton Oakman. We've kind of mentioned East Peoria in passing in this episode, and they're 3-0 for the first time, in a decade, and it's something that this school is not used to. But they've put a lot of faith back into this program right now, and that's just a duo that I think is going to really start to command things the rest of this season, especially next year. They'll both be back next year. Oakman's a junior. Jackson's just a sophomore, starting as a running back. And even though they haven't played top-tier opponents per se in the first 3 weeks, to be able to, like Jackson did in week 3, carry 22 times for 201 yards, 3 touchdowns, so he's averaging nearly 10 yards per carry. In week 1, had 197 yards with a touchdown. To be able to do that as a sophomore in high school, how much more promise does that give you going into, his 3rd and 4th year? And how much does that say about their offensive line? It's come a long way. They returned all of their starters on the line. They're obviously doing him a favor up front there. So those two guys really have it rolling, and they're a deeper team that they've been. They've got some faith and some promise, and if they can pull out the 4-0 start, kind of like we've alluded to, over the first couple weeks, then they'll have something to play for the last 5 weeks. Even if they lose the Dunlap, lose the Morton, lose the Metamora, even if they just give themselves one shot over the last 5 weeks, you just got to get one win, they'll have something to play for, and it can inspire a little confidence that you never know, maybe pull off an upset.
We've talked about, kind of early on with East Peoria and how strong of a start they've had. We talked about building that culture, but it truly is more than that. Yes, they are building a strong culture in East Peoria that really hasn't been there in years past, but like you said, they're playmakers on that team, and they're young, and that's something that when younger guys, when they see someone making plays, they want to be like that. So it's going to continuously. That's how you see Washington every year they have a new running back that pops up, or Peoria High, stuff like that. Those guys see them and they want to emulate that parts of the game. So that's something that East Peoria is going to be improving on every year after now.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, you want someone that kind of you want to kind of emulate your game after someone, like you said. You want to kind of have it's always good to have a role model, and to be hey, I want to be. Let's say you're a 12-year-old kid playing football in East Peoria, and you're like, okay, I want to be like R.J. Jackson. Whatever. If you have that mentality, that means that you're probably going to push yourself to work as hard over the next couple of years to be like R.J. Jackson, to be like him, and maybe even be better than him, And, again, not to say that, there were players in the past that there's no one that you wanted to be like,
No.
These kids are heroes of the whole community, especially the younger guys, and stuff. But, when you see people that are doing those things and, succeeding, that makes it huge, It's kind of, whatever the opposite of a double-edged sword is. It's not a double whammy, it's a double goodie, Yes, or a double goodie, because it's benefiting you currently, and then it'll keep on kind of making that cycle go in the future, which is good to see.
I really think too, it's just adding the community support too. Right? The kids are watching, but now you've got alumni behind you, you've got the parents behind you, you got maybe the local businesses behind you and stuff like that. I think that all makes a difference when the guys know they're supported. People are showing up. I was not at their game against Limestone, but I heard it was a great crowd, and they're putting together themed nights where they're getting one night they're having the JFL kids come out, and other weeks they're honoring maybe somebody going into the school's Hall of Fame for athletics. They're getting reasons for people to come out. And the team's winning, I think, because of it. So it's really just kind of coming full circle for East Peoria, doubling the size of the kids in their program from the COVID year, more than doubling, rather. They've come a long way, and obviously they should be very proud of where they've gone. They've got to still win. They've got to be able to, take care of business in each of the games they play. They're going to have the biggest tests in front of them. But, yeah, some big performances. Oakman and Jackson really looking good early on.
Definitely. And back to your one question, Teddy, about top performers. I again, a lot of good guys this week. If I had to pick one, I'd probably say one of the better ones, and it really came in a big bounce back performance, was Alec Wieland, quarterback for Normal U High. Again, he had a great game against Bloomington. His team just came up short. He had a tough interception, kind of late in that game or whatever. And he was able. I knew that loss probably stung for him and the Pioneers. Again, they were right there in that game and nearly came back and won. But Wieland and his guys, they got back and they made a statement against Decatur and MacArthur, who they don't have quite as many playmakers as they did last year. We saw them, MacArthur against Metamora in the playoffs. Some big playmakers from that team are gone, but still overall a pretty good team. And U High, pretty much more or less wiped the floor with them. I mean, they were up huge at halftime. They pulled most of their starters in the second half. And so, Whelan put up a big game, 16 for 21, 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. And again, that was just through the air. I think he probably has some extra rushing yards too as well. So, big bounce back performance. It's what you want to see out of your senior quarterback. And, another big game against Lincoln before facing Rochester and then Glenwood the week after that. So, big schedule coming up for U High. But, again, I love what Whelan and the Pioneers are doing.
Definitely an incredible performance. Not too often do you see, I think at the high school level, you see a lot of, running back dominance. But seeing a quarterback at that level that can throw for 300, 5 touchdowns, that's truly is impressive. Mm-hmm. For me, though, I'm going to go wide receiver for my first one. I'm going Dylan Anderson of Pekin.
Oh, you have to. You have to.
He had a great game. Not only wide receiver, but also at corner as well. You got the game-sealing interception to beat Dunlap in a rivalry game. Dylan had 3 touchdowns for Pekin and to help them, go over the Eagles. But he's a sophomore. One thing I know about Dylan.
What is it with this sophomore class right here? I mean,
we talked a lot about him today.
Holy cow! Week 1 it was Cody Mulbauer. I think we talked about a couple sophomores last week. I had to go back and see. Then you got Dylan Anderson and RJ Jackson. I mean, the sophomore class right here is just insane.
The future's bright. I mean,
my
Central,
word!
The well ain't drying up yet, folks. I think it's been replenished, and even 2026, the juniors and stuff too. I mean, I really think these kind of not that the seniors aren't good around here, but these middle classes are just bringing it right now, and makes me even wonder what's coming up for the freshmen and the guys that are kind of coming up behind that. It's just been steady increase of talent coming over the last few years. All sorts of schools. Like, it's not even just your typical schools. They're popping up everywhere. Like, it's just crazy.
Yeah. High school is cool in that regard because, you're a fan of college football or the NFL. You can kind of see going into the levels before that, the guys that are coming into your program. But and you can kind of see that if you're like, your son or something like that, whatever, plays football. But for the most part, say you're a fan of Dunlap, say you're a fan of Washington, you don't know who's coming up, and so it's kind of just like as it happens. That's the one of the good parts about high school football. It's so cool in that regard. It's unique every single season and can really just flip just like that. As for my other one though, I will be going with a player that played in the CSM game we worked this week, and that's Carter Prina. I've talked about him. I truly thought even during that game, it was impressive because I asked you for if you had the stat line. I don't have the exact stat line for Carter Prina, but it's just every single time we were watching on Metamora's offense, Carter Prina was just swarming around the edge. And whether he got his hands on the quarterback, he was constantly causing pressure and just disrupting that Metamora offense. And overall, Prina had one of the better pass rushing games I've seen all season for an individual.
Yeah, and this is not meant in a bad way at all, but Carter Prina, I feel like he's been around for so long, he might as well be like a super senior. Did he get an extra year eligibility? But that just tells you the great career he's had, and he's so experienced now because of how long he's been around. And It's gonna be really sad, the day that we're not able to talk about him, on the Panthers anymore. But yeah, Prina is a monster, and there's not gonna be many lines that are gonna be able to compete with him. Even the best lines, that's why I'm curious to see Pekin and Washington, right? Pekin's got an experienced offensive line versus the experienced Carter Prina and the other guys that come with it. So we're going to be looking at some of those specific areas. When you go to your next high school football game, folks, or you're watching on Clutch Sports Media, don't always just watch the quarterback. Sometimes just focus in on a play where you're watching the line, because you can see kind of how the game is won and lost right there.
Definitely, that's a good point right there. Good point right there for sure. And I'll tell you if you had something, but I always wanted to, again, I'll leave it up to you, captain the ship. But I know we've been talking for a while. Maybe you should wrap it up soon. Before we go, though, I want to know one game that's maybe not an obvious game. And I know we've done this segment sort of in the past. Real quick, in just a couple words, what is the game that you're kind of watching this week that maybe you think is maybe an under-the-radar game to watch? I have a list of games pulled up if you guys want it.
Yeah, boy, there's a couple I could go with here. I'll just throw a couple out.
Here, I'll pass over to Teddy. Teddy can see here.
Talk shortly.
Yeah, right there.
Even though DMAC lost big last week, they're playing Tri-Valley. It's a rivalry game. DMAC's 2-1. Wouldn't be shocked if the Chiefs could pull something out there. And then probably the other one, that I'd be watching would be EPG and Eureka. EPG is 2-1 also. Now Eureka is very good, but a couple small school games right there where you've got the away team maybe looking off the pole, a little bit of an upset. So rivalry games and stuff. I think the small school's got a lot of great games, and probably arguably the most games to watch coming out of small school this week.
For me, you're looking at this list John has here. It's a team that I've already seen. Maybe it's a little basic, but Normal West and Bloomington's going to be a good one. I truly think so. Normal West was a team where, when they went against Normal Community, I kind of had them. I didn't think they were going to win. Never really know, but I did think it was going to be a close game. It wasn't. Normal Community showed their dominance. They really are one of the better teams in the area. But Normal West, in that game we saw week 1, they played really good offensively, great quarterback talent, and defense played well. So I think against Bloomington, a team that's 3-0. They're hot right now. That could be a team. That could be a game that really stands out for a way for Normal West to bounce back, or for Bloomington to really show that they are on the upper echelon of the Big 12.
Definitely. And real quick, my game to watch. Well, one of them is Princeville at Roval Williams Field. I'm definitely watching that game. 2 undefeated teams. Great Lincoln Trail Prairie Land small division game right there. So I think that one could go either way. Two teams that are just playing good football. And another one, too, is Monticello at BCC. We saw the Saints win really big in weeks 1 and 2 against Pontiac and Rantoul. Two teams that are, habitually near the bottom of the Illini Prairie Conference. And then they play, there's, kind of the, there's about 5 or 6 teams in the IPC that are really good squads or whatever. You don't know what you're going to get out of them. First time that BCC faced one this past week against Paxton Buckley Loader, they lost the game in overtime. Very close. They definitely could have won that game. But again, they face Monticello, who is very good this week. Sages, I believe, are 2-1. I know our Dalton Carmine saw them against week 2 in IVC. They have a great quarterback. I think he's an Illinois baseball commit. I want to say Ike Young, I think is his name. Could be wrong about that, so don't quote me. But Monticello is a very good team. Their only losses is St. Joseph Ogden, who near the top of the Class 3A poll. So it's going to be a great test for BCC. And hey, a win gets you right back on track. It keeps you firmly in the IPC title race. A loss, and again, you're kind of maybe heading back to the drawing board, saying, okay, where do things go wrong? We need to make some adjustments. About halfway through the season or whatever. So again, still some really good players on that Saints team as well. So going to be a good one down there, I think, in Bloomington.
Yeah, quick word for Leroy and Hayworth.
Oh,
3-0 Leroy and 2-1 at Hayworth. So just quick word for that one too. I think we might have a lot to recap going into next week. I don't know if I'll be able to join or not, but yeah, there's gonna be a lot of small school to recap going, and of course a lot of marquee big school games too that we kind of touched on earlier in the episode. So it's going to be a busy week 4. You better get your popcorn ready, be following along. Maybe you have to try to follow a couple games at once. It's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I think real quick, week 4 this year, I think the matchups, again, a lot of them, not all of them, some of them were kind of the same as last year's week 4 matchups. This year, though, the matchups, I think, are way better. I think this is, last year there was kind of a lull in the middle of the season about like good games. I think it ramped it towards the end. I think now Now in the next couple weeks, we're going to get some good games at the end of the season, but we're also going to get some good ones here in these middle weeks too as well. So I think that wraps it up
it
for
certainly
me.
will be an exciting week 4, like we mentioned, about a lot of big schools, smaller schools. So stay tuned and do your own. We'll recap on next episode over that. But just do your own research on that. Stay up on it. It's going to be a good week 4. Overall, we've talked for quite a while here, went a little bit over what we were probably expecting here. But
it's my bedtime.
Yeah, same here.
But overall, I appreciate everyone for tuning in. I'm Teddy Ball alongside Gavin, Russell, and Jonathan Michael, and thank you guys for watching episode 3 of In the Clutch Season 3. We'll see you guys next time.